All right, everybody. Again, my name is Brianna Spriggs. I'm a licensed professional counselor. We are continuing our Back to Church series, and we are discussing ways to reconnect with the church after you've experienced hurt in the church, or as we call it, church hurt. Last time, we talked about the importance of seeking help outside of the church first, and that it's just important to have an outside context to where you could express your feelings like you need to express them, and you could prepare to integrate back into the church and face some of the triggers and things like that you may encounter while you're trying to reconnect. And today we're going to address, I think it's a question that everyone in this position may ask, and that is, should I return to my old church or should I go to a new church? So many people, I'm sure, are kind of like in between those two decisions, where on the one hand, you may want to just start fresh and say, hey, let me find a new place to start over, to deal, I've dealt with my issues, I'm good, but I just realized that I can't go back to the same place where I experienced that hurt in. And on the other hand, you may have some people who are like, hey, we had a barrier that came in between us. Some hurt happened, but I still feel like the church is a good church for my family, and I do have reason to stay here and work through whatever happened. And so let me tell you something. Either way, it's about what works for you, what works for your spirit, what works for your family, and ultimately what's also healthy for the church. Don't go back to the church and you're still in anger, and the whole time you're there is going to be a continuation of strife. So we want what's best for the church community as well. So here's some considerations though whenever you are trying to answer that question. Do I go back or do I just start over? The first thing is, how deep was the hurt? Okay, so was this just some kind of fallout or misunderstanding, or even just something, that happened? It may have been pretty serious, but it's not necessarily in the structure of the church. It may have happened, between saints, or, with this or this misunderstanding with leadership. And, it was a pretty difficult hurt, but it can be worked through. If it is considered abuse, then the answer would, of course, be no. If you experience like some deep abuse in a church situation, well, going back would only re-expose you to that abuse. All right. So the first thing is to consider, how deep was that hurt? Is it something that's, able to be recovered from? Is it something that's able to be reconciled? Or is it something that, you should probably not revisit because you may actually be re-exposing yourself to some sort of trauma? It wouldn't be wise to return back in that case. The next thing is, when making a decision, you have to be prepared for the possibility of no change. So you have to ask yourself, if I go back to the church and it doesn't change, the thing that caused the hurt doesn't change, am I okay with that? So that's something that you must consider. The possibility that whatever it is that you encountered that caused the hurt, it may not change. The same person may be there. The same practices may be in operation there. The same system may be there. So whatever it is that caused the hurt, you may have to re-encounter it when you return to the same church. But it is also important to consider that you may encounter similarities to what you experienced in the past in a new church. Sometimes the things that cause hurt are not necessarily localized to one church. There are things that really just happen in communities of people. And so even though it was a hurt for you, just because there are people everywhere and people in every church, you can possibly encounter a similar situation even in a new church. So when you're making your decision, you have to be considerate of that factor as well. What does God say? Pray and ask God. Oftentimes, the reason why conflict and hurt happens is because we may be trying to stay somewhere too long that God may be trying to move us away from. And it doesn't mean that the church is bad. It just means that you may be out of season. So are you trying to extend the season that God told you to end? If so, you may be walking back into more trouble if you're doing so out of disobedience to God, and vice versa. If God told you to stay, if He planted you in that particular church and you're making a decision to move, well, now you become a Jonah and you are out of the will of God by moving ahead of what God said. So it's so important to seek God about this decision. God, do I return back to this place? Is my season up, or do you still have work for me to do in that context? If you want me to go back, equip me spiritually, mentally, and emotionally to be able to maintain until you move me. But if you want me to move, give me the courage to be able to obey your voice and to take a step forward even when I may be scared to do so. The next thing is, check yourself for codependency. Oftentimes when God is trying to move us to a different place, codependency comes into play, where I don't know what I would do at another church. I don't feel safe, moving out, and I don't feel like I could even be saved if I'm not at this particular ministry, when God may be trying to challenge you to trust Him. So a lot of times, make sure that your dependency is upon God and not on a particular church. And last but not least, it's important to understand that forgiveness is necessary regardless. So if you're making a choice to move to another church, make sure that you're not doing so out of anger and you're not harboring angry feelings and making your decision based on that. You have to forgive regardless, because no matter what church you go to, there's only one body. Okay, and so you have to make sure that the repair has happened. Now, forgiveness is a whole different journey. So I'm not saying that you should automatically have forgiven a person or that it's going to happen overnight. That is a process between you and God ultimately. If it's people issues that have caused the hurt, it really would help if you have some type of closure with the person that the conflict was with. You want to be careful not to just move from a church, but you leave an unfinished business in another church. That's important to consider as well, because sometimes we never actually resolve what the issue was, and then we move on to another church and we bring those same feelings and we bring those same issues into another church, and then you're at risk to project those feelings onto a new pastor and a new church community. So you have to make sure that forgiveness, reconciliation, all of those things are necessary whether you stay at a church or whether you decide to leave. Okay guys, so that's our second video. I hope that you are enjoying this series and I hope that it's helpful. If it is, I need you to let me know in the comments, y'all. In this series, we are talking about going back to church and how to reconnect to a church after you've experienced some type of hurt within the church setting. Hopefully this is changing lives. Hopefully this is encouraging you, and hopefully this is building your courage to ultimately return back to church and heal whatever hurt you may have experienced in the church setting. All right, y'all have a good day. See me for the next video. We talking about it, y'all. Have a good one.